Welcome, everyone. I wasn't sure anyone would be here considering the time slot, but I appreciate you all attending and hopefully you'll get some value out of this. My name is Ashraf Abid, and I am a Drupal developer. I've also been teaching Drupal for over 10 years now. All those little badges at the bottom, that's Acquia certifications. I teach courses on Acquia certifications, which is why, it makes sense for me to go through all of them just to keep those courses up to date. If you're ever looking for training, feel free to get in touch. The company name is Debug Academy. We teach courses on Drupal architecture, Acquia certification prep courses, as well as part-time long-form courses for people who are looking to become Drupal developers. And those courses are always live and they're always up to date. So as soon as the next big thing comes out in Drupal, the course will teach it. This is a relatively short topic, time slot, so I'm going to jump right into it. So Drupal has historically prioritized architecture above all else. Historically, that has essentially been at the cost of UX, right? Focusing on one thing sometimes leads to other areas not getting as much attention. And this was always likely to happen. If you compare the background of the founder of Drupal, Dries, with the background of, let's say, WordPress's founder or co-founder, Matt, Matt has some history as a designer, and Dries has a PhD where his dissertation was profiling techniques for performance analysis and optimization of Java applications. And you could kind of see those differences in the carryover to the personalities of the software they built. And I'm going to make up some terminology here and we'll just get on the same ground. You'll see why. So DX refers to developers, people who are writing code, building their applications. I should say the experience of developers. LDX, this is not industry-wide terminology at all, but this would be the experience of someone like a site builder, a low-code developer, someone who doesn't write too much code. What is their perception like using Drupal? UX would be standard end user, so not a content editor, not a developer, not a site builder, just people visiting the website. E is for editor, so content editor UX is EUX, and finally, technical debt. So you'll shortly see why I'm defining these. But I mentioned Drupal has historically focused on architecture, sometimes at the detriment of UX. And a handful of examples of that include hooks, render arrays, field API. And I'm going to talk about these, so I'll just let you look at the slide. But these are some of the things that have been added to Drupal core over the years for the sake of, again, supporting certain architectural goals or visions. And the cost of adding these things. So for hooks, for example, I know Drupal developers who have been doing Drupal for years. They've built, entire websites, and they'll come to me and say, hey, I've been doing Drupal for a really long time, and I still don't know how to write a hook. Like, that's what I want you to teach me. Render arrays, they have a reputation of being arrays of doom. The field and entity API, I've worked with the developers who came from non-Drupal backgrounds, and they just go and start creating database tables themselves, bypassing Drupal's field and entity API, and they prefer that approach. Composer, those of us who are here with Drupal 7, there was a lot of friction going from Drupal 7. People didn't want to use Composer. They wanted the FTP or even using Drush to download. Object-oriented programming, along with plugins and services. Once again, a lot of friction in that move. JSON API, implementation of the JSON API spec in core. When people look at the output of that, they see a lot of information, and sometimes they prefer simpler APIs. And they also, a lot of us maybe aren't interested in decoupling our projects. We want Drupal to stay a majestic monolith. And finally, single directory components. This is in favor of better UX, but when you look into it, the feedback I hear is, okay, we still have info YAML files in this. I thought this was supposed to be easier. Okay, now the flip side of these things is we're finally reaching a point where all of these decisions that just seemed like unnecessary complication, we're finally reaching a point where we're going to bear the fruits of those decisions. And we're converging to Drupal CMS and some other options we're seeing discussed quite a lot. So hooks, plugins, services, and object-oriented programming in general. These have enabled us to change anything in Drupal, as in we can swap out services, we can override forms, etc. We can modify any HTML, and we can reduce technical debt by working with common interfaces, and so this is the introduction. We will get into like specific what do you do in 2025 in terms of module decisions and whatnot in a couple of slides, just so you know. But yes, render arrays, single directory components, those are enabling us to manage the UI, manage display modes through the UI by integrating those two. That's something that's coming up. The field and entity API ensures consistency, interoperability. There's some words you always read and you always write and you never say out loud, and that's one of them for me. But you see, we have the views module, which we can use to list any entities of various entity types. Any entities we create are compatible with JSON API, etc. And finally, we have Composer, which is enabling recipes and hopefully soon automatic updates. And finally, JSON API, the implementation of that spec has made Drupal more appealing to front-end developers who are maybe more accustomed to decoupled projects. So when they enter Drupal, they have something they're familiar with. Okay. Now, all of these things together bring us to where we are rapidly approaching. We now have recipes, experience builders hopefully on the way, project browsers on the way, Drupal CMS, formerly known as Starshot. So all of these things are enabling a brighter future for junior developers and a faster onboarding in general, also faster, lower cost Drupal projects. Now you might think, well, WordPress has a lot of these things, right? WordPress has had some of these things for ages, right? Project browser, they essentially have something like it. But I have two charts really just to illustrate direction, right? These are not based on hard numbers. These are based on my experience. I've been teaching for more than 10 years. I've taught hundreds and hundreds of students who are experienced in Drupal and WordPress. And this is an aggregate of basically their impressions. So what we see here is the experience building websites from different perspectives. So the green shows traditionally trained developers, so computer science graduates. So back in Drupal 7, they really disliked building with Drupal. It was not the way that they were used to things being done, not object-oriented. Once we switched to object-oriented programming, their experience improved dramatically. You find Symfony developers joining Drupal and thinking, this looks familiar. Other developers who are comfortable with object-oriented programming also feeling more comfortable earlier. However, that coincided with a big drop in developer experience for self-taught Drupal 7 developers, as well as for site builders in general. When Drupal 8 came out, it became a lot more difficult for them to build with Drupal. With Drupal 11, we see a lot of these things improving. The developer experience for these self-taught developers as well as site builders improving with things like Layout Builder, single directory component, and some of the supporting contrib modules, which we will discuss in just a short moment. Now, after this point is essentially aspirational. This is what we're working towards. Drupal CMS or Starshot, The hope is that you bring the developer experience a far way. You bring it far along and make it much better for the self-taught developer and the site builder, because maybe they don't necessarily need to know how to use Composer out of the box. And a lot of the site is just enabled for them out of the box, right? Things like path auto, all the modules you historically have needed to know are just there, and that greatly improves the experience of a new site builder. Over time, we hope Experience Builder V1 and who knows when V2 would be out. We hope that those bring us to a much better experience for everyone. One more chart, and then we'll move to the main piece. Now, I want to draw like sort of a comparison between WordPress and Drupal here. And you can see in Drupal 7 days, so first of all, the red is the experience of the editor, or the person using the back end of the system. So for WordPress, that's always been pretty positive, right? So you can see back in Drupal 7 days, WordPress already had a pretty good editor experience. You get to Gutenberg, they improved it somewhat. There's debate in the WordPress community over whether it's actually a value add or not. But essentially, WordPress has remained fairly steady in terms of its editor experience. Now, this orange chart is meant to be the debt, the technical debt. And that is meant to signify, the orange is meant to signify WordPress's technical debt. Now, WordPress has prioritized backwards compatibility. So for orange, high is bad. For red, high is good. So for technical debt, you don't want more of it. So WordPress has been accumulating technical debt over the years. The lack of something like Composer being part of WordPress core also makes it harder to make plugins play nicely with each other. Some plugins will break other plugins. And I have some evidence and quotes from WordPress people signifying this. But essentially, at this point in time, with all of the backwards compatibility support and just the way code is written in WordPress, there's a lot of technical debt. The downside to that is it makes it a lot harder to evolve and significantly, change WordPress. With Drupal, on the other hand, the green is the editor's user experience. It hasn't been spectacular out of the box. But the hope is we are here. We're at a point where we're working on Drupal CMS. We're prioritizing improving that editor experience. And we hope with time it'll continue to get better. And the technical debt, thanks to the refactor to object-oriented programming, the reliance on Symfony instead of maintaining all of our own code in-house, etc., it should stay relatively low. I do think the addition of Experience Builder is going to increase technical debt somewhat. But for the most part, the application manages technical debt fairly well. And there is technical debt, but it just is at a much lower level. Now, these are a few quotes from or related to WordPress. One of them is actually from today's keynote. Theodore said, "We couldn't identify any security vulnerabilities in Drupal-supported modules. The same cannot be said of WordPress." So these are signs, again, related to the whole accumulation of technical debt. The middle quote is actually from WordPress's official documentation. Code should be prefixed with at least 4 letters. We actually recommend 5. You're going to run into conflicts. It's just kind of like cowboy style out, just be careful out there. You name the functions whatever you want, but put something random at the beginning just to make sure you don't conflict with other people. Now, yes, I'll continue. And another WordPress provider, conflicts are inevitable with the thousands of plugins, each with their own coding styles and standards. And all the plugins are allowed to just print out raw HTML. So you couldn't hook in and alter all of the text inputs and swap them with a different, newer text input easily. Whereas with Drupal, we have things like render arrays that enable that. Now, building with Drupal in 2025, the high level is choose a starting point. So if you're a Drupal expert or you're building a complex project, you could still start with Drupal core. Otherwise, Drupal CMS is a good fit. Even if you're experienced with Drupal, if you're building a very simple site, Drupal CMS might make the most sense. Select and apply recipes, refine the recipes, and then continue building the site the way you always have. Okay. Now, recipes they're a collection of configuration and content. I'm sure you've heard about them at a bunch of other talks here. They're configuration, modules, and content. A recipe rolls them all up and lets you apply them to your website. You can look through what's called the cookbook, which is essentially a list of recipes, and pick which recipes you would like to apply. And you can apply multiple recipes. You use the command listed here, again, available in the documentation. And once it's applied, you don't have to use what it gave you. You can go modify it, change the configuration, delete the content it gives you, etc. I would expect for the most part we're applying recipes early on, but you could apply them at any time. Okay. Now, building a site, you want to prioritize display modes. That ensures you standardize your content. It's compatible with views, so you don't have to restyle using views rewrite rules. It works for all the entity types, and you update it once, it gets updated everywhere. On Debug Academy's site, we have our course pages, you have the full page display mode, teaser, and card, and it's 3 displays of the same content. We reuse these throughout the website. Now, single directory components, these are meant to tell Drupal about your components. So once you have single directory components in use, you can use something like UI patterns 2, the module, to actually integrate single directory components through the UI. If you don't want to use that module, you can also use Twig to implement those single directory components. And with Twig, we have Twig blocks, which allow for naming sections of your Twig file and later on injecting code into those sections. That's one of the technologies that Twig, that single directory components utilizes. So your code could look something like this. This is not a single directory component. This would be, let's say, a node HTML Twig file. In this file, you would embed code from another Twig file and swap out specific sections, any of those named Twig sections from the file you're inheriting from. Okay. Now, single directory components streamlines this. It makes it a little bit easier, not much. It's really just using Twig under the hood. So you do regular Twig things. Instead of embedding or including the full path, you can just put theme name, single directory component name, or module name, single directory component name, depending on where the single directory component lives. So you apply it the same way that was listed in the previous slide. The reason single directory components add value, it's not so much here that they add value, it's really enabling contrib modules to look at the single directory components and expose them through the UI, so your content editor can then map these values through the UI. Again, for now, that's with something like UI patterns too. And just about at time, but in terms of building the rest of your site, one of the modern options you could use, so until Experience Builder is ready, you could use Core's Layout Builder. It's, decent out of the box. The UX isn't great, but it does give you the drag and drop and the ability to override layout per page. Alternatively, you might want to consider using paragraphs, layout paragraphs, and Mercury editor, all 3 of these together. What they allow you to do is essentially use the paragraphs module, but get a layout builder interface within your content. The layout builder moves to the edit page. Instead of needing to go to the layout tab, you just go straight to the edit page. You get your layout builder on the left side, and you have the other, certain fields that need to be outside of the layout builder in a right column. And with the Mercury editor as well, it just improves that. It actually adds that right column I was mentioning. And it essentially gives you automatic preview without decoupling your site. So you can do this whole layout builder setup using those 3 modules and do all the editing on the edit page, and you get automatic preview. So if I were building a site in 2025, these are all the technologies that I would be looking towards. Start with, again, Core or Drupal CMS, depending on my background and the type of site. Apply the appropriate recipes, modify them, or I should say modify the output of those recipes. And then personally, paragraphs isn't my favorite, but paragraphs, layout paragraphs, and Mercury editor combined is hard to argue with. So that combination really is effective in giving your editors a good experience, and I encourage you to give it a try. So I'm at time, but if you have any questions, feel free to come by. I'm happy to, chat at any time. My name again is Ashraf. I run Debug Academy. I'm based out of Washington, D.C., but the classes are typically all online. And yeah, I'll be here for the next hour or so. So thank you all. Again, I'm happy to take questions. We are at time, but I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.